Hi there. I am back with another two-part series now on human suffering. As I venture into all the blessings and opportunities in crisis, our role in this time of great awakening, and all the positive things about what we are facing, I still need to lay a foundation for this discussion in terms of human suffering and why we have suffering to begin with. In this video, part 1, I will be talking about the nature of suffering, different types of suffering, and theories of origin and influential factors involved in human suffering. In part 2, then I will get into the significance of suffering, the blessings in suffering, and how we can transform ourselves through suffering. Let's start with a definition. Suffering is a state of withstanding pain, discomfort, or hardship, enduring any unpleasant feeling, emotion, or sensation, or bearing any kind of mental or physical strain or pain. Suffering can manifest in any area of life, in the mind and body, within one's family and relationships, within one's lifestyle and livelihood, and within one's spiritual journey. So, what is the difference between pain and suffering? Pain and suffering can be considered one and the same, or they can be looked at differently. Pain can be seen as inevitable, whereas suffering is often seen as optional. Pain can be seen more as physical, whereas suffering more mental. Pain is the signaling in the body that something is happening. Suffering is the interpretation of what is happening. Generally speaking, the more resistance one has to their experience of pain, the more suffering, versus the more acceptance or understanding one has to pain, the less suffering they will experience. Next, let's look at the different layers that we experience suffering. Psychologically, suffering can show up through real or perceived threats, fear, scarcity, or trouble, worry, overwhelm, confusion, rumination, insomnia, negativity, and judgment, exaggerations, dishonesty, and denial, anger, frustration, and agony, sadness, grief, and despair, guilt, shame, and regret, or urges, temptations, and inner conflict. Physically, suffering can show up as hunger, thirst, being hot or cold, and tiredness, achiness, tension, and anxiety, nausea, dizziness, disability or handicapped, any kind of physical injury, malfunction, or misalignment, sickness, illness, or any disorder causing discomfort or pain, symptoms of aging and dying, and physical and sexual abuse, or any kind of torture. Interpersonally, suffering can show up through longing, desires, and unmet needs, competition, conflict, disagreement, and codependency, resentments, jealousy, and insecurity, rejection, abandonment, and betrayal, humiliation, secretiveness, loneliness, isolation, and neglect. Existentially, suffering can show up in fears relating to death and dying, fear of not living a full life or not having meaning or value in life, fear of not being loved or not being good enough, fear of not meeting life standards and expectations, fear of not being able to provide for self and family, or fear of not contributing to the world or not being able to reach completion in personal projects and mission work. There are many significant things to mention about suffering. First, suffering is subjective. Suffering depends on one's worldview and the perception and beliefs of a person, family, community, and culture as to how much suffering a person experiences. What might be considered terrible and even traumatic suffering for one person or group of people might be considered a challenge, feat, or even a daily norm for someone else. The standards, norms, and viewpoints of different people in different situations determines what classifies as suffering. Next, suffering is relative. People's level of tolerance varies across situations. Resilience and tolerance to pain and suffering depends on what a person is used to or familiar with, how others are reacting, what is usual and normal in the moment, expectations about the duration and severity of suffering, and how a person defines their power in the current circumstance. For instance, some people experience suffering after not eating for 6 hours, whereas a person fasting might not experience suffering for several days of not eating. Or some people experience suffering when their legs are burning after standing all day, whereas a mountain climber who's experiencing a stronger burn thrives in this feeling. Or for a third example, some people experience suffering in having to tell the truth, whereas other people will experience suffering in not telling the truth. Next, suffering ranges from mild to moderate to severe. Suffering can range in intensity, duration, and frequency. Suffering can be acute or chronic, with a quick or slow onset and departure, and can go through phases as well. The severity of suffering is determined by the experiencer, by the understanding and the perceptions of those around, and by group reactions to one kind of suffering versus another. Looking at two examples, mild suffering might be thinking that somebody doesn't like you. Moderate suffering is finding out it's true, they don't like you and they're out to get you. Significant suffering would be them actually sabotaging your status, reputation, and position. And severe suffering could be that sabotage ending your career or leading to bankruptcy and divorce. And for another example, mild suffering could be showing up with a cold. Moderate suffering is getting worse and finding out that that cold is really a flu. Significant suffering is passing that flu to all your children and everyone is down for a week. And then severe suffering could be that that flu turns into a chronic illness, or heck, even a manufactured bioweapon designed with ill intentions. Next, suffering is inescapable. Suffering is a part of the human experience. It is unavoidable. To be alive is to experience suffering. Suffering to some degree shows up every day for most people. But not everybody recognizes or realizes they are suffering. There are people who would deny feelings or sensations of suffering in their life. But if they were denied any of their needs for even a short amount of time, such as food, water, sleep, movement, attention, love, or particular comfort, most would experience immediate discomfort and suffering. Next, suffering is disguised. Suffering gets normalized so much it has become disguised and unrecognizable. People become so used to and conditioned to managing their suffering that they don't realize it is suffering. This is because people are too busy denying, ignoring, escaping, avoiding, distracting, or covering up their suffering that they don't notice it. Or they feel the manifestation of suffering in other parts of their life, but they are not tuned in to the core reasons and perpetuating factors of their suffering. Next, suffering drives behavior. Suffering underlies all motivations, desires, passions, and pursuits. Suffering motivates survival, safety, connection, meaning, purpose, and personal and spiritual growth. The objective to mitigate, depreciate, or eliminate suffering drives behavior on an individual, family, community, corporate, and government level. Everything that humans are doing is to move away from suffering and toward the positive opposite, whatever that is perceived to be in that moment in time. All right, now let's move into the third and final section, origins of suffering. Before we can talk about the significance and the opportunity of suffering, let's look at some theoretical explanations for suffering to begin with. It is critical to acknowledge your understanding and your viewpoints of suffering because it directly influences the way that you face and deal with suffering. Finding the meaning in suffering, whether by spiritual faith, trust in the natural order of things, or practical gains and payoffs in the material world, eases and enhances the experience of suffering in the way that we naturally adjust our response to it. Getting curious about the nature of suffering and the contributing factors brings people together through vulnerability and shared experience because everybody experiences similar things just at different times. And talking about suffering gives perspective and depth and meaning to our experience of healing and transformation. So, what are the theoretical origins of suffering? That is, what do different cultures believe about suffering? There are 5 main categories to explore. Suffering is believed to come from 1. Natural occurrences, 2. Divine balancing, 3. Supernatural factors, 4. Material world and social dynamics, and 5. Personal factors. Keep in mind that these are just theories. It is up for you to decide where suffering comes from and why we have suffering. So let's take a look at these 5 categories of belief. Number 1, natural occurrences. Suffering comes from the very nature of life, the cycle of birthing, developing, aging, and dying. Suffering is the result of natural disasters that interrupt people's well-being, daily life, and infrastructure. Suffering comes from the universe or planet protecting a larger order of natural phenomena, or suffering comes from survival of the fittest. Now, we cannot deny that these things do create hardship and suffering, but is this as deep as it gets? The next theory of origin to explore is number 2, divine balancing. Suffering comes from the disconnection or sense of disconnection from the Creator and divine order of things. Suffering comes when a person is out of alignment with the collective good. Suffering comes through the laws of cause and effect, such as you reap what you sow. Suffering comes from a violation of divine law, working against the characteristics of the divine cosmos. Or suffering comes from sin, karma, doing bad deeds, being selfish and self-serving. What do you think? And why do millions of people believe this or something close to this? The next theory of origin of suffering to discuss is number 3, supernatural factors. Here, some people believe that suffering is the result of karmic retribution upon the individual, family, ancestry, or collective karma. Or suffering is the result of being so distant or even abandoned by divine beings that dark energies control the earth. Or suffering is the result of evil and wickedness manifesting from other realms, such as demonic realms. Or suffering is the result of extraterrestrials being present or having invaded our societies, interfering with humans. Or suffering is the result of spirit possession over people, or things like ghosts living vicariously through people. Wow, right? How much have you actually thought about something like this? I'd say that we can't prove that it isn't true. The next theory of origin for suffering is believed to be caused by number 4, material world and social dynamics. Suffering comes as a result of social conditioning to the material world and all the developing desires, pursuits, attachments, and addictions. Or suffering comes from the externalization of all of our needs, problems, and solutions. Or suffering comes from social pressures, competition, and the raising social expectations and unreachable standards. Or suffering comes from shadow governments and mafias running the world and undermining human rights and freedoms and controlling social systems, informational channels, and the economy and commerce. Or suffering comes from division, disconnection, disagreement, polarization, and conflict in society. Or maybe suffering is the result of not having a place to honor and face pain and suffering in our culture. Rather, everything is designed to escape it. Again, like natural occurrences, these factors can and do create suffering for people, but can social material factors explain all of it? The last thing to mention, which is based more on practical observation than theory, are all the personal factors associated with suffering. Clearly, there are many things that we as a people are doing to either create or perpetuate suffering for ourselves, for people around us, and for people around the world. So, number 5, personal factors associated with suffering. One could say that suffering comes from the disconnection from the true self, core values, and life purpose. One could say that suffering comes from being hurt by others, trauma, and hurting others, karma. One could say that suffering comes from ignorance, self-deception, denial, and false thinking. Suffering is also believed to come from the ego, self-interest, desires, attachments, and addictions. Suffering comes from poor decision-making, maladaptive behaviors, reactive responses. Suffering comes from, and I'll just list them now, personal neglect, lack of self-care, malnourishment, and toxicity, living in fear, scarcity, negativity, victimhood, anger, and judgment. Suffering comes from being different, going against the grain, and also rebellion of norms. And suffering comes from lack of meaning and faith and guiding principles. In summary, as we can see, the experience of suffering can be understood in many ways. 4 insights that I've realized over the years helping people to transform themselves through suffering are: Number 1, suffering is mostly self-perpetuated and human-created, regardless of additional factors. Number 2, suffering signals that something is unresolved or imbalanced. Number 3, suffering must be resolved and addressed at its core. And number 4, humans have the ability to transform themselves through suffering. The awareness of human suffering is always lingering in the background, driving and influencing how we interact with the world. Often, before we even get a chance to sit with our suffering, another temporary solution has already presented itself. As a society, generally speaking, we are not processing what suffering means on an individual and collective level because we are too busy selling and chasing distractions and so-called cures to alleviate the experience. By not addressing the nature and the origins of suffering, we are just delaying and even perpetuating the suffering and then missing out on the blessings and opportunities that emerge in the transformation of suffering. But when we can expand our awareness to what is really going on, we can approach it more mindfully and productively in the shaping and outcome of our lives. In part 2, I will get into the significance of suffering, the benefits of suffering, and how we can transform ourselves through the experience of suffering. Now, please share your impressions and your experience of suffering so that we can discuss this together and we can hear different points of view. Thank you for watching.